Mike Dawson had perfected his routine over years of practice. Target elderly homeowners, identify urgent repairs that didn't exist, demand cash up front, and disappear. Sweet and simple. The frail, white-haired man who just called about a leaky roof seemed like the perfect mark. Lonely, trusting, and clearly confused about home maintenance. Easy money. But Robert Sullivan wasn't actually confused about anything. After 30 years with the FBI's white-collar crime division and 5 more with the State Consumer Protection Bureau, he knew exactly how these scams operated. What Mike Dawson didn't realize was that he hadn't found his next victim. He'd walked straight into a sting operation months in the making. Some predators believe they're the apex of the food chain until they discover they're actually the bait. For Mike Dawson, this ordinary Thursday would become the day his carefully constructed operation came crashing down. The hunter was about to become the hunted, though he wouldn't realize it until it was far too late. The modest ranch house on Oakwood Drive looked perfect. Aging roof, overgrown yard, faded paint. All signs pointed to an elderly owner struggling to maintain the property. Mike pulled his unmarked van into the driveway, adjusting his fake company polo shirt and grabbing his clipboard. He'd picked this neighborhood carefully, affluent enough for money, old enough for vulnerable residents. Robert Sullivan watched through slightly parted curtains as the van arrived right on schedule. The hidden cameras were rolling. 3 in the living room, 2 in the kitchen, 1 on the porch, all feeding directly to the command vehicle parked down the street where his colleagues from the Bureau were monitoring everything. The trap was set. "Good morning, sir," Mike called out, all smiles and manufactured charm as Robert opened the door. "Home shield inspections. Hear about that roof leak you reported." No such company existed, of course, but the magnet sign on his van and embroidered logo on his shirt created a convincing enough facade for most people to accept without question. Robert played his part perfectly. Slightly stooped, voice quavering just enough, eyes deliberately unfocused behind thick glasses. "Oh yes, thank you for coming so quickly." He shuffled aside, inviting Mike in with the hesitant movements of someone whose body no longer moved with certainty. "It's been dripping something terrible since the last rain." Mike stepped inside, eyes quickly scanning the interior. Family photos, older furniture, but signs of money too. A nice television, what looked like real artwork on the walls. "Good. This wouldn't be a waste of time. Happy to help, Mr. Sullivan. These things can cause serious damage if not addressed quickly. Smart of you to call us right away." "My nephew usually handles these things," Robert explained, the fictional nephew being a calculated detail to suggest family who might interfere if given the chance. "But he's away on business this week. I remember seeing your truck in the neighborhood before, so I thought I'd call directly." Mike nodded sympathetically, though inwardly he was celebrating. No family around meant no one to question his assessment or pricing. "Let me take a look at where you're seeing the leak, and then I'll head up to check the roof." His routine was always the same: identify a legitimate minor issue, then exaggerate it into a catastrophe. Robert led him to the hallway bathroom, where a small water stain darkened the ceiling. It was genuine. The Bureau had created it yesterday by pouring a controlled amount of water through a tiny hole they'd drilled from the attic. Nothing damaging, but convincing enough to justify the call for service. "See how it's spreading?" Mike said gravely, pointing to the edges of the stain with exaggerated concern. "This indicates significant water penetration. If left unchecked, you could be looking at structural damage, mold, even ceiling collapse. Let me check the source from above." His expression had transformed from friendly to deeply concerned in seconds. As Mike climbed into the attic through the hallway access panel, Robert used the opportunity to touch his watch, activating the microphone to communicate with the team parked down the street. "He's taking the bait," he murmured, his voice no longer frail, moving into the diagnostic phase of the scam. In the attic, Mike spent less than 2 minutes looking around. He found the minor leak source the Bureau had created but ignored it in favor of creating a more serious problem. He deliberately scuffed some wood near the roof joints, disturbed some insulation, and took photos that would appear alarming to an untrained eye. When Mike descended, his expression was precisely calibrated between professional concern and poorly concealed alarm. Mr. Sullivan, I'm afraid it's more serious than I initially thought. You've got significant structural compromises in your roof supports. See these photos? He held out his phone, showing the staged damage he'd just created. Robert put on his best worried face, peering at the photos with feigned confusion. Oh my, that does look bad. What does it mean? He was careful not to overplay the role, just vulnerable enough to be a target, but not so helpless as to seem unrealistic. The best bait looks exactly like what the predator expects. It means we need to act quickly, Mike explained, his voice dropping into what Robert mentally categorized as the serious professional tone. The one scammers use to establish authority. Those support beams are already compromised. One more heavy rain and we could be looking at a partial roof collapse. Robert allowed his eyes to widen with alarm. Collapse? My goodness, what needs to be done? The question was the first hook, inviting the scammer to outline a solution, which would inevitably be overpriced, unnecessary, and require immediate cash payment. Robert had heard hundreds of these pitches during his career. Mike guided Robert to the kitchen table, pulling out forms from his clipboard with practiced efficiency. Let me walk you through what we're looking at. He began sketching a crude diagram of roof supports, deliberately making the situation seem more complex than it was. These trusses here are water damaged and need immediate reinforcement. The problem, Mike continued, circling areas on his diagram, is that this kind of water intrusion has likely affected multiple systems. We're looking at structural repairs, new underlayment, potential electrical hazards where water may have reached wiring. Each item he listed was another fabricated problem, another charge to add to the estimate. Robert nodded along, asking just enough questions to seem engaged but not knowledgeable enough to challenge the assessment. Inside, he was cataloging each false claim, each exaggeration, building the case that would eventually lead to Mike's arrest. The hidden cameras captured every word, every gesture, every fraudulent assertion. So what's this going to cost me? Robert finally asked, voicing the question that would initiate the next phase of the scam. The price reveal was always where scammers showed their true colors, high enough to be profitable, not so high that the victim would immediately balk. It was a delicate balance that experienced scammers like Mike had mastered. Mike put on his apologetic face, the one he'd practiced in the mirror, sympathetic but resolute. I won't sugarcoat it, Mr. Sullivan. To do this properly, with the structural repairs, new waterproofing, and sealing all potential leak points, we're looking at $700. The figure was astronomical for what was actually a minor repair job worth a few $100s at most. Robert allowed his expression to shift from concern to shock. That's quite a lot. I wasn't expecting. He let his voice trail off, providing the opening that most scammers eagerly jumped at. The opportunity to offer a special discount that made the victim feel they were getting a deal, even as they were being robbed. I understand completely, Mike said, right on cue. Look, I might be able to help you out a bit. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Since we're already in the neighborhood on another job, I can knock it down to $6,800 if you can decide today. We could start tomorrow and have it done before your nephew gets back. Robert hesitated, playing his part. Even that's quite steep. Do I have time to think about it? Maybe get another estimate? This was the moment that typically separated skilled scammers from amateur ones. The good ones had ready answers for comparison shopping, delays, or family consultations, all designed to create urgency and isolation. Mike's friendly demeanor cooled just slightly, urgency entering his voice. Mr. Sullivan, with all due respect, this isn't something that can wait for other estimates. The structural integrity is already compromised. More water intrusion could cause damage that would double or triple the repair costs. This isn't routine maintenance, it's emergency prevention. I understand the urgency, but it's still a lot of money, Robert persisted, intentionally appearing conflicted. Would it be possible to break it into smaller jobs? Perhaps do the most critical parts first. He was leading Mike deeper into the scam, encouraging him to reveal more of his tactics while the cameras recorded every word. Mike shook his head firmly. That would actually cost more in the long run. These systems are interconnected. Addressing one without the others would be like putting a bandage on a broken arm. The analogy was nonsensical from a construction standpoint, but delivered with enough confidence to sound plausible to most homeowners. "What if I called my insurance?" Robert suggested, introducing another common obstacle that scammers had to navigate. Many elderly victims relied on insurance or wanted to file claims for major home repairs, something most scammers avoided because it invited documentation, inspection, and legitimate estimates. Mike had a ready answer, as Robert expected. "You could, but in my experience, they'll take weeks to send an adjuster, then deny the claim, calling it routine maintenance or pre-existing conditions. Meanwhile, more rain comes, more damage occurs." He leaned forward with manufactured sincerity. "And your rates would likely increase for filing a claim." Robert nodded slowly, as if being reluctantly convinced. "I suppose you're right. It's just..." He hesitated, introducing the financial concern that would trigger the next phase of the scam. "I don't keep that kind of money in my checking account. I'd need to move funds around." "That's not a problem at all," Mike responded smoothly, right on script. "We can work with whatever's easiest for you. Check, cash, even payment plans." He paused deliberately before adding the hook. "Though I should mention, for cash payments, we can offer an additional discount. Saves us credit card fees and paperwork. Call it an even $6,000. There it was, the cash discount, the hallmark of home repair scams. Cash left no paper trail, couldn't be stopped like a check, and once handed over was virtually impossible to recover. Robert made a show of consideration, knowing that each moment he kept Mike talking was another damning statement captured on video. "Cash would be difficult to get that much on short notice," Robert mused, setting up the next test. "My bank limits daily withdrawals. Maybe a deposit now and the rest when the work is complete." This was the standard negotiation tactic many victims attempted, trying to protect themselves with partial payment, not realizing no work would ever be done. Mike's expression shifted subtly, a flash of calculation crossing his features before the professional mask returned. "I understand your concern, but unfortunately, our supplier requires payment for materials up front for a job this size. Tell you what, we can do half now to secure the materials, and half before we begin work tomorrow." "Half now would still be $3,000, Robert pointed out, deliberately sounding overwhelmed. "That's an awful lot of cash to have on hand." He was pushing Mike toward the next predictable step in the scam, offering to accompany the victim to the bank, a tactic that served both to isolate victims from family members who might intervene and to ensure payment. Mike nodded understandingly, though a hint of impatience flickered in his eyes. "Many of our older clients have the same concern. If it helps, I'm happy to drive you to your bank. That way you don't have to worry about carrying that much cash alone. We can go right now, and I'll have you back home in 30 minutes. "That's very kind," Robert said, injecting just enough relief into his voice to be convincing. "Let me get my wallet and jacket." As he stood, he touched his watch again, signaling to the team that they were moving to the next phase. The offer to drive him to the bank was exactly what they'd anticipated, and another criminal act captured on record. Mike waited in the living room while Robert presumably gathered his things. In reality, Robert was speaking quietly into his concealed microphone in the bedroom. Subject has quoted $8,700 for non-existent repairs, offered cash discount to $6,000, and has offered to transport to bank for immediate payment. We're proceeding to phase 2. When Robert returned, he was carrying an old-fashioned checkbook and a light jacket despite the warm weather, playing into the stereotype of elderly people always feeling cold. "I found my checkbook, but I suppose that won't help if you need cash." He intentionally projected vulnerability, appearing confused and increasingly dependent on Mike's guidance. "The bank isn't far," Mike assured him, already guiding Robert toward the door with a light hand on his elbow. "My van's right outside. We'll be quick, and then you won't have to worry about your roof anymore." The subtle control tactics, physical guidance, reassurance, problem-solving were textbook predatory behavior against the elderly. As they stepped onto the porch, Robert pretended to hesitate, introducing one last obstacle. "Maybe I should call my nephew first? He might not like me spending so much without telling him." This was the moment scammers typically showed their true colors, when the possibility of family interference threatened their payday. Mike's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Sullivan, no disrespect to your nephew, but he's not here dealing with this emergency. By the time you reach him and explain everything, we'll have lost our crew availability. They'll be booked on another job, and you'll be looking at next week at the earliest." "I suppose you're right," Robert conceded, allowing Mike to guide him toward the van. As they approached the vehicle, he noted its condition. No company name permanently affixed, just the magnetic signs that could be quickly removed. The license plate was partially obscured by mud, another common tactic to prevent identification later. Mike opened the passenger door with exaggerated courtesy, helping Robert step up into the seat. "Safety belt," he reminded with false concern, reaching across to secure it. "The bank on Main Street okay? First National?" He was already pulling out of the driveway, eager to get to the cash withdrawal that would complete his scam. "Yes, that's my bank," Robert confirmed, continuing to play along as the van turned onto the main road. Through the rear window, he could see an unmarked sedan pull out 2 houses down, his colleagues following at a discreet distance. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan, Mike oblivious to the net tightening around him. "Been in construction long?" Robert asked conversationally, initiating the small talk that would keep Mike talking and potentially revealing more about his operation. Scammers often let down their guard once they believed the victim was committed to payment, sometimes bragging about their expertise or previous successful jobs. 20 years, Mike replied smoothly, the lie flowing effortlessly. "Started with my father's company, branched out on my own about 10 years back. Specialized in emergency repairs because I saw how many homeowners were left hanging by bigger companies. We pride ourselves on rapid response." Each claim was another fabrication captured by Robert's hidden microphone. "That's impressive dedication," Robert remarked, noting how Mike avoided mentioning his company name or providing any verifiable details about his supposed 2 decades in the industry. "Have you done many jobs in my neighborhood?" He was fishing for information about other potential victims in the area. Mike nodded enthusiastically, sensing an opportunity to build credibility. "Just finished the Johnson's place 2 streets over. Complete roof restoration. And the Hendersons on Elm had similar issues to yours last month. Caught it just in time before major damage occurred." The names were almost certainly invented, but Robert made a mental note to check. As they approached the bank, Robert decided to push a little harder. "And your crew, they're ready to start tomorrow? How many people usually work on a job like mine?" The question was designed to force Mike to elaborate on his fictional workforce, creating more documented falsehoods for the eventual case. "Usually 3-man crew for structural work like this," Mike explained, pulling into the bank parking lot. "My best guys, all certified, background checked, insured. They're finishing up another job today, but I've already spoken to the foreman about your situation." The lies piled higher, each one digging his legal grave deeper. Mike found a parking space near the entrance, then came around to help Robert out of the van with the same exaggerated courtesy as before. "I'll come in with you," he offered, making it sound like a favor rather than surveillance. "Banks can be confusing with withdrawal forms and all that. Happy to help however I can." Robert allowed himself to be guided toward the bank entrance, moving with the deliberate slowness of an elderly man. "That's very kind," he said, while touching his watch again. This signal alerted the team that they were entering the financial institution, where additional cameras would capture what happened next. Inside, the bank looked ordinary. Tellers behind counters, a few customers waiting in line, security cameras visible in the corners. What wasn't obvious was that 3 of the people sitting in the waiting area were undercover officers, and the manager had been briefed about the operation in advance. The stage was set for the final act. Mike steered Robert toward a desk rather than the teller line. "For withdrawals this size, we should speak to a personal banker," he explained, continuing his helpful facade. "They can process it faster, and you won't have to stand in line." In reality, he was avoiding the teller windows, where large cash withdrawals might trigger additional questions. A bank employee approached, actually an undercover officer named Patricia Wilson, though her nameplate identified her as Susan Reynolds. "Good morning, how can I help you today?" she asked pleasantly, giving no indication she was part of the sting operation as she led them to her desk. "My friend here needs to make a withdrawal," Mike explained before Robert could speak. Another controlling tactic. $3,000 cash for some urgent home repairs we're doing for him. His roof has serious structural issues that can't wait. He was establishing himself as the authority, subtly directing the conversation. Robert played his part perfectly, appearing slightly confused but trusting. "Yes, I need cash for repairs, Mr." He paused, deliberately appearing to have forgotten Mike's name, forcing him to identify himself fully for the record. It was a subtle but effective investigative technique he developed over years of undercover work. "Mike Dawson, from Home Shield Inspections," Mike supplied readily, falling into the trap. "We're taking care of Mr. Sullivan's roof before it becomes a real disaster. Found some serious issues during our inspection this morning." He was now on bank surveillance, claiming to represent a fictitious company, another charge to add to the growing list. Patricia Susan nodded professionally while typing something into her computer. "I'll need to see some identification, Mr. Sullivan, for a withdrawal of this size." She was following standard protocol, but also ensuring Mike's full interaction with the banking process was documented. Robert fumbled with his wallet, extracting his driver's license with deliberate clumsiness. "And may I ask what the cash is for?" Patricia continued, directing the question to Robert rather than Mike. A standard anti-fraud measure, but also designed to force Mike to either let Robert speak or intercept the question, both revealing behaviors. Mike immediately jumped in. "Like I mentioned, urgent structural repairs to his roof. We found significant damage during our inspection that needs immediate attention." His eagerness to control the narrative was another red flag that any trained professional would recognize, though he clearly assumed Patricia was just a regular bank employee. Patricia nodded, typing notes. "And Home Shield Inspections? They're the contractors doing the work? I'm not familiar with them." The question seemed casual, but was deliberately designed to get Mike to reaffirm his fraudulent business on record. Robert watched with concealed satisfaction as Mike walked directly into their trap. "Yes, that's us. We specialize in emergency structural repairs," Mike explained confidently. "Been serving this community for over a decade now. We're actually offering Mr. Sullivan a significant discount since we're already working in the neighborhood." Each false claim was another nail in the coffin of his eventual prosecution. Patricia maintained her professional demeanor while completing the withdrawal form. "I'll need your signature here, Mr. Sullivan," she said, sliding the document across the desk. "And just to confirm, you're withdrawing $3,000 in cash today for home repairs. Is that correct?" The question was deliberately directed at Robert, forcing him to verbally confirm. "Yes, roof repairs," Robert affirmed, signing the form with a slightly shaky hand, part of his elderly persona. "Mr. Dawson says it's quite urgent." He was carefully establishing on record that Mike had created the sense of urgency and suggested the cash payment, building the evidence of predatory behavior toward what appeared to be a vulnerable senior. Patricia nodded and stood up. "I'll process this right away. Please wait here for just a moment." She walked away with Robert's ID and the withdrawal slip, ostensibly to get approval, but actually to confer briefly with the operation commander, who was monitoring from the bank manager's office. Left alone momentarily, Mike leaned closer to Robert. "Once we get the cash, we'll stop by my supplier on the way back to your place, so I can place the materials order immediately. That way we're all set for tomorrow morning bright and early." He was already planning the next phase, a fictional stop at a non-existent supplier. Robert nodded agreeably, maintaining his trusting facade. "You certainly move quickly. It's reassuring to have someone so efficient handling this problem." Inside, he was cataloging each new fraudulent claim, each step in the scam that demonstrated Mike's deliberate, calculated approach to defrauding him of his savings. Patricia returned carrying an envelope. "Here we are, Mr. Sullivan. $3,000 as requested." She handed Robert both the envelope and his ID. "Would you like to count it to confirm?" The question was standard protocol, but also ensured that what happened next was clearly captured on the bank's security cameras. "Yes, thank you." Robert said, opening the envelope and beginning to count the bills slowly and methodically as an elderly person might. The cash was real. The operation had secured actual funds to maintain the authenticity of the sting. Mike watched intently, his eyes fixed on the money with poorly concealed anticipation. As Robert finished counting, carefully resealing the envelope, Mike stood up. "Ready to go? We should get to the supplier before they close for lunch." His eagerness was palpable now that the cash was in hand, his entire demeanor subtly shifting from solicitous to directive. The facade was beginning to slip as he neared his goal. They thanked Patricia and walked toward the exit, Mike keeping close to Robert's side, occasionally guiding him with a light touch on the elbow. To any observer, it might have appeared that he was simply helping an elderly man, but his constant physical contact also served to maintain control and prevent potential second thoughts. As they stepped outside the bank, Robert deliberately slowed his pace, creating a moment of natural pause before they reached the van. "I should put this somewhere safe," he said, patting the envelope of cash in his jacket pocket. "Wouldn't want to lose it or have it fall out." Mike nodded, his smile now fixed and impatient. "Good idea. You can just give it to me for safekeeping if you'd like. I'll make sure it gets to the supplier." The request was delivered casually, but represented the moment his criminal intent became unmistakable, attempting to take possession of the funds before any work was performed. "Actually," Robert said, his voice suddenly changing, losing its quaver and gaining the authoritative tone of his professional life, "I think it's time we ended this charade, Mr. Dawson." He stood straighter, shoulders squaring as he dropped the elderly persona entirely. "Or should I call you by one of your other names? Michael Harrington? Matthew Dixon?" Mike froze, confusion replacing his confident expression. "What are you talking about?" But his eyes were already darting toward the van, calculating escape routes as he sensed something had gone terribly wrong. The friendly mask slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Let's just get going, Mr. Sullivan. The supplier is waiting." "No one is waiting, because there is no supplier," Robert stated firmly, reaching into his pocket. Instead of the cash envelope, he extracted a badge. "Robert Sullivan, State Consumer Protection Bureau. You're being investigated for fraud, elder abuse, and operating without a contractor's license, among other charges." He held the badge up so it caught the sunlight. Mike's face drained of color. For a split second, he seemed paralyzed by shock. Then instinct took over, and he turned to bolt toward his van. He made it exactly 3 steps before realizing he was surrounded. The sedan that had followed them from the house had pulled up, and 2 officers were approaching from behind. "I wouldn't," Robert advised calmly as Mike hesitated, clearly contemplating whether he could still escape. "In addition to fraud and elder abuse, you really don't want to add resisting arrest to your growing list of charges." His tone was almost conversational, but left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. As if on cue, Patricia emerged from the bank, her demeanor completely transformed. She held up her own badge. "Agent Wilson, FBI. We've been tracking your operations across 3 counties, Mr. Dawson. Your scam ends today." The professional banker had vanished, replaced by a federal agent with a voice of authority that matched Robert's. Mike's shoulders slumped as he realized the trap had completely closed around him. "This is ridiculous," he protested weakly. "I was just giving an estimate for legitimate repairs. Nothing illegal about that." But his eyes betrayed his panic as he watched more officers approach from unmarked vehicles that had quietly surrounded the bank. "An estimate?" Robert repeated with raised eyebrows. "Is that what you call charging $8,700 for a repair that legitimate contractors confirmed would cost $350 at most? Is that what you call creating damage in my attic to justify fraudulent charges? Is that what you call attempting to isolate and transport me to withdraw cash under false pretenses?" Mike's face contorted with anger as the reality of his situation became undeniable. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine." His confidence was clearly shaken. But the instinct to bluff remained, the same instinct that had served him well in countless scams against actual elderly victims who lacked Robert's resources and experience. Robert smiled thinly. "Actually, we have everything on video and audio. Your inspection, your fraudulent claims, your damage to my property, your insistence on cash payment, your offer to drive me to the bank, your representations to the bank officer. Every word, every action, documented with crystal clarity. The officers moved in, one of them reciting Miranda rights as handcuffs were secured around Mike's wrists. Mike stood in stunned silence, the full magnitude of his predicament finally sinking in. This wasn't just a botched scam. It was the culmination of an extensive investigation that had clearly been building for some time. We've identified 17 victims so far, Robert continued conversationally as Mike was being processed. Elderly homeowners across 3 counties who paid you thousands for repairs that were either never performed or done so poorly they created new problems. But I suspect we'll find more once we execute the search warrants. Mike remained silent now, the bravado completely drained from his expression. As he was led toward a police vehicle, Robert could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, wondering how many years he was facing, whether a plea deal might be possible, how completely his comfortable scam had imploded in a single morning. Back at Robert's house, actually a bureau property maintained specifically for sting operations, the team gathered to begin processing evidence. Mike's van had been impounded, revealing a treasure trove of fake business cards, magnetic signs with different company names, and tools used to create artificial damage rather than repair it. "Good work today," the operation commander told Robert as they reviewed footage from the hidden cameras. Textbook execution from start to finish. On the monitors, they could see every moment of Mike's scam unfolding. His fake inspection, his deliberate creation of damage in the attic, his increasingly urgent push for immediate cash payment. "He's not the only one," Robert replied, reviewing his notes. "Based on his methods and territory, he's likely connected to the Carson brothers we've been tracking. Same targeting approach, same price points, same cash-only tactics. He'd been at this long enough to recognize patterns, to see connections between seemingly isolated scammers." The evidence technician looked up from Mike's phone, which they'd already accessed with a warrant. "You called it, sir. Got text messages between Dawson and both Carson brothers discussing jobs and splitting territories. They've been coordinating for at least 8 months based on the conversation history." Robert nodded, satisfied but not surprised. "Contact the prosecutors. This just went from a single scammer to an organized fraud ring. We'll need to expand the investigation." After decades pursuing white-collar criminals, he knew that operations like Mike's rarely existed in isolation. There were usually networks, shared techniques, even informal training systems. The next morning, Robert watched from the observation room as Mike Dawson sat in the interrogation room, the gravity of his situation now fully apparent. His initial bluster had faded overnight in a holding cell, replaced by the grim realization that the evidence against him was overwhelming and his options severely limited. "He's ready," noted the young detective assigned to conduct the interrogation. "Assessment says he'll flip on his associates to reduce his own exposure. Classic self-preservation pattern." She had the case files tucked under her arm, organized with all the evidence they'd gathered during yesterday's operation and subsequent search warrants. Robert nodded in agreement. "Start with the elderly victims, especially the ones who lost their life savings. Make him confront the real human cost of his actions before offering any deal." After years of watching scammers like Mike operate, Robert knew their greatest weakness was facing the actual consequences of their predatory behavior. Through the one-way glass, they watched as Mike's expression crumbled when confronted with photos of his victims. Real elderly homeowners who had lost thousands to his scams. Some had been forced to take out loans. Others had been unable to afford legitimate repairs after paying Mike for work he never completed. The human toll was undeniable. By afternoon, Mike had provided detailed information on the entire network. 7 other scammers operating in a loosely organized ring, sharing information about vulnerable neighborhoods and effective tactics. In exchange for his cooperation, he hoped for leniency, though the prosecutor made no firm promises given the severity of his crimes. "We'll need to move quickly," Robert told the team as they prepared warrants for the remaining scammers. "Once word gets out about Dawson's arrest, the others will scatter." He'd seen it happen before, These networks collapsed quickly when exposed, with members often fleeing to other states to establish new identities and continue their schemes elsewhere. Within 48 hours, coordinated raids had brought in 5 more members of the network. Only 2 had managed to flee before they could be apprehended, but their identities and methods were now known to law enforcement agencies across multiple states. The operation had effectively dismantled an entire fraud ring. As Robert reviewed the preliminary case files, the full scope of the network's activities became clear. Conservative estimates suggested they had defrauded elderly homeowners of over $2 million in the past 18 months alone. Many victims had lost their entire savings. Some had been forced to sell their homes. "We're organizing a community awareness presentation," his colleague informed him, dropping off more files. "Senior centers, community groups, churches, anywhere we can reach potential victims before these scammers do." Prevention had always been as important to Robert as prosecution. Stopping crimes before they occurred saved both money and heartache. The press conference that afternoon drew significant media attention. Standing at the podium, Robert looked directly into the cameras as he described the sting operation and subsequent arrests. "These individuals deliberately targeted our most vulnerable citizens. Our parents and grandparents, our neighbors and friends who built this community." In the weeks that followed, more victims came forward, encouraged by the news coverage to report scams they had previously been too embarrassed to acknowledge. The case expanded, revealing connections to similar operations in neighboring states, patterns of organized elder fraud that spanned multiple jurisdictions. Mike Dawson's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 months later. Though he had cooperated with authorities, the judge was unmoved by his claims of remorse. "You systematically preyed upon the elderly," the judge noted before delivering the sentence. 15 years, no possibility of parole before serving at least 10. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. For Robert, who attended the sentencing, the outcome represented more than just the conclusion of one case. It symbolized a shift in how these crimes were being treated. No longer dismissed as minor fraud, but recognized as the serious predatory acts they truly were. Each successful prosecution sent a message to others who might consider similar schemes. The awareness program they developed reached thousands of seniors across the state, teaching them to recognize the warning signs of home repair scams: unsolicited offers, pressure tactics, cash-only demands, and claims of urgent problems requiring immediate action. Knowledge became a powerful preventative tool in vulnerable communities. Robert found himself invited to speak at law enforcement conferences, sharing the techniques that had made the sting operation so successful. "The key is understanding their psychology," he explained, to rooms full of attentive officers. "These scammers target specific vulnerabilities. Learn their patterns and you can anticipate their every move." 6 months after Mike's arrest, Robert stood in the community center addressing a room full of senior citizens. "These scammers count on your politeness, your trust, and sometimes your isolation," he explained gently. "They create false emergencies to bypass your natural caution. Remember, legitimate contractors won't demand immediate cash or pressure you for quick decisions." The impact of the sting operation extended far beyond the immediate arrests. Insurance companies began funding educational programs specifically targeting elder fraud. Local building departments implemented stricter verification processes for contractor licenses. Community watch programs incorporated home repair scam awareness into their regular activities. A comprehensive safety net was slowly being built. For Robert, now nearing retirement himself, the case represented a fitting capstone to a long career. "I've pursued every kind of white-collar criminal," he told his colleagues during a small celebration at the bureau, "but few have been as deliberately predatory, as consciously exploitative, as those who target seniors for these scams." 1 year after the operation, Robert received an unexpected letter from Mike Dawson, now serving his sentence at the state correctional facility. "I never thought about the people," Mike had written. "They were just targets, not human beings with lives I was destroying. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know your work made a difference." Robert wasn't naive enough to take the letter at face value. Prisoners often sought to demonstrate remorse for parole considerations, But the message nonetheless underscored the importance of humanizing victims, of making perpetrators confront the real impact of their crimes. That had always been central to his investigative philosophy. The training program Robert developed before his retirement became standard curriculum at the Bureau, teaching new investigators how to recognize, document, and prosecute home repair scams. These aren't victimless crimes, the training emphasized. These are targeted attacks on vulnerable populations that cause lasting financial and psychological damage. 2 years after the sting, follow-up data showed a 30% decrease in reported home repair scams across the state. While some of this could be attributed to increased awareness making scams less successful, enforcement officials believed the dramatic sentencing in the Dawson case had also served as a powerful deterrent. At his retirement ceremony, Robert was presented with letters from victims whose cases he had helped resolve. Elderly homeowners who had received restitution, families who had seen justice for exploited parents and grandparents. "You gave us back our dignity," one woman had written. "You showed us we weren't foolish for being kind and trusting." The methods Robert pioneered continued to evolve after his departure from the Bureau. New technologies enabled more sophisticated monitoring, better coordination between jurisdictions, and more effective prevention strategies. But the fundamental approach remained the same. Understand the patterns, anticipate the tactics, and protect the vulnerable. On quiet evenings in his own retirement, Robert sometimes reflected on the thousands of cases he'd handled throughout his career. None had been more personally satisfying than the home repair sting operations, turning the tables on those who preyed on vulnerability, using their own tactics and assumptions against them. The hunter becoming the hunted. Justice served.